Hello, my ATSEVS533 students. Dr. John Schrage here, and we're ready to start our first lecture that's actually about the content of the course. We're going to start diving into the IPCC Assessment Report 5, and we're going to start figuring out what this tells us about climate and climate change and so on. And to that end, of course, it's extremely important that you've actually done the reading that we're going to be talking about. If you haven't done it, pause this video and go do it now. Okay? It really is that important. Okay, if you're still with me, fantastic. That means you've done the reading and we're ready to start taking apart what you've seen, and probably what you saw wasn't your favorite thing in the world. You know, these IPCC assessment reports that are kind of our state-of-the-art knowledge of climate change are a real drag to read. I mean, not only is it full of bad news, but they're written by committee, and you can tell, and it's kind of painful, and it's kind of redundant, and oh my goodness. I don't know what to tell you about that, okay? We're all here because we're doing environmental science stuff, and this is how we communicate. But we do need to kind of understand a little bit more about what the purpose of these reports were, and who made them, and why they make them, and so on. They are written by the so-called Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, which is a multidisciplinary organization of recognized experts in the fields associated with climate and climate change. The IPCC panel was created by a combination of the United Nations Environmental Program and the WMO, or the World Meteorological Organization. And they created this organization, this panel, and I want you to get the idea the panel is just a few people. There's something on the order of like 500 people on the panel, and this panel was not really created so that you or I or someone on the news or your parents or something can understand what's going on in climate change. The IPCC panel actually has a fairly specific mandate. Specifically, they are there to provide governments with a clear view of the current state of knowledge of, well, issues associated with climate change, like the science of climate change, the potential impacts of climate change, and the options that they have for adaptation and mitigation. But what I want to make sure that you're clear about is that this is designed for policymakers. People who aren't necessarily experts in climate need to be able to at least parse this document while sitting around a boardroom table at the office of such and such trying to formulate policies and so on. But it is a briefing for governments and so on, helping them understand what is the state of the art of these knowledge, of these disciplines, and what that means about climate change, and presenting options for them. Now, this report, the one that we're using in this class, is the AR5, the Assessment Report 5, or 5th Assessment Report, which was actually originally published in 2014. And if you've actually spent some time drifting around on that website that I gave you where the assessment report is kept, what you've noticed is it's a huge document. We're going to spend most of our time on the I can't think of the exact name of the volume that we're reading from, Scientific State or something like that, or Scientific State of Knowledge or something like that. But and that document alone, the printed form, is something like 1,800 pages. And then there's another whole document that's about like mitigation and adaptation strategies, and I can't even remember. There's like 4 volumes altogether from different working groups within the IPCC. We're spending most of our time on the State of Scientific Knowledge document. Famously, the IPCC shared a Nobel Peace Prize back in 2007 for their so-called 4th assessment report. Remember, the other half of the Peace Prize went to Al Gore, associated with the advocacy and so on that he did, related ultimately to the movie The Inconvenient Truth. But, you know, you might remember that it was kind of a strange thing at the time for him to get the Nobel Peace Prize for work on climate change. But of course, that's relating us to this notion that there are national security issues and peace and justice issues and so on associated with climate change. Something that often is a little bit confusing to students in, say, the ATSEVS533, the Science of Climate Change class. They aren't really thinking about it in a class like that in terms of like national security issues and so on. The IPCC comes to this process with a very specific mandate and a very specific philosophy about what they're supposed to be doing, but with no preconceived ideas about what the research should mean or anything like that. What they're saying when they are working on this is, and I'm quoting here from the IPCC Assessment Report 5 that you just finished reading, scientific hypotheses are contingent and always open to revision in the light of new evidence and theory. Contingent, as in we can, this is true based on what we know now. Okay, it is always open to revision based on whatever comes along. If new theories come along, if new evidence comes along, we can make changes to what we're doing. In this sense, the distinguishing features of scientific inquiry are the search for truth and the willingness to subject itself to a critical re-examination, which is very different than many human activities, which are very antithetical to critical self-examination and all this kind of thing, where like you're willing to take a look and see if things continue to be true, were you mistaken, and so on. That is fundamental to the scientific process, and it is fundamental to how climate change research is done, and it is very fundamental to the mission of the IPCC. Continuing then from the IPCC report, it says, modern research science conducts this critical revision through processes such as the peer review. Probably you are familiar with the scientific process, and you know that when scientists want to publish their work, they use a peer review process where an article is submitted to a journal and then anonymous reviewers who are peers in the discipline review it and reject it or accept it for publication and so on. That is a key aspect of the process. It isn't like in many human activities where there are authorities and they state what is happening and that makes it true or makes it the policy or whatever. This is about a search for truth through the peer review process. That can be either through journals or as the sentence goes on, at conferences, and then the procedures that surround publication in peer-reviewed journals. Scientific claims about environmental processes are analyzed and held up to scrutiny. People look at them, they criticize them, they get feedback on them. Even after publication, findings are further analyzed and evaluated. When you write a scientific paper, you really think that now it's been accepted for publication. Let me tell you, you think it's done. It is not done. It is always open for reinterpretation and further analysis and further evaluation. And that's a feature, not a bug. It is this self-correcting nature, that is the self-correcting nature of the scientific method. That is a good thing. But there's more to it than that. Basic science also requires decisions. Decisions about what data gets included, what processes are being used, what models are you testing, what hypotheses are you testing, and so on. And that's why the AR5 report continues, science strives for objectivity, but inevitably also involves choices and judgments. Scientists make choices regarding data and models, which processes to include and which to leave out. Eventually usually those choices are uncontroversial and play only a minor role in the production of research. I mean, if you're going to be making some climate model that's going to be assessing future climate change and so on, there's a million little decisions you have to make about how the model is going to run. We're going to be learning quite a bit about modeling and how to interpret models and so on, but there's a million little technical details about how it's configured, the resolution and the time step and the parameterizations and so on, most of which are important decisions but not controversial decisions. Okay, they're going to just be about how you set up the experiment. They aren't going to be, the kind of thing that then someone's going to claim you did the wrong. Well, maybe you did do something wrong, but that's what the peer review process is all about. Now, sometimes, however, the choices scientists make are sources of disagreement and uncertainty, according to the IPCC report. These are usually resolved through further scientific inquiry into the sources of disagreement. In some cases, however, experts cannot reach a consensus view. In many cases, there may in fact be no definitive solution to these questions. Maybe something about how one model works versus another model works. We don't have the knowledge yet to decide which of these two procedures is the right way to do it. There may not be a consensus yet. The IPCC wants policymakers to understand the state of the art of the knowledge so that they can see what the certainty is and so on. In fact, just to kind of wrap up here, it says the IPCC process is aimed at assessing the literature as it stands and attempts to reflect the level of reasonable scientific consensus as well as disagreement. So, a couple of key things there. Boy, that is a very loaded sentence. One, assessing the literature. The IPCC, under the auspices of the United Nations Environmental Program and the WMO, doesn't conduct any research. They don't fund research, they don't conduct it themselves, and so on. They are purely in the business of assessing the literature. They take the many scientific publications from conferences and peer-reviewed journal articles and so on, and they decide what it means. Okay? Even experts may not be able to surround themselves with all of this literature. It takes a panel of experts to understand what the whole thing means and then help policymakers know what to make of it. Help them understand the consensus about the state of the knowledge, the research. Now, before we go on, I'm going to show you something. I like to interject these kind of questions into my lectures here. And so I've got a little question here, and there's 4 choices. And once we go through them, you're going to make a choice on this web page from farther down on the page. And depending on which one you choose, you're going to get moved to a different web page where I'll either tell you about what was right or what was wrong about those answers, okay? Now, these questions are going to be helpful to you. Sometimes I just wrote them as I made the lecture, and sometimes these are actual questions that I pulled off other semesters' quizzes. Like in this case, okay? Either from the quizzes or from tests, I just use the same little badge symbol that I've got right here. That's an actual question that people have gotten credit for before. But just to be clear, you're not getting credit for this answer right now, okay? I don't have any mechanism to know which of these 4 choices you clicked on or anything like that. Right now, we're just kind of getting feedback here, okay? So, here's question 1 from this lecture. Who established the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change? A, the Nobel Prize Committee. B, the United Nations Environment Program. C, the American Meteorological Society. Or D, the National Weather Service. Who started the IPCC? Go ahead and make a choice from one of those 4 options and click on it and then get some feedback before you'll be moving on to question 2.